Caw-caw. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brendan, aka Cliff Jumper, and we are turning our attention back to Jetta after a very long hiatus from this project work. We've been putting it off because, well, other projects have come up that needed more desperate attention, but my daughter is driving now and it is time to teach her how to drive stick, which means Joan needs a clutch so that we can do that. So we're going to be diving in and doing a clutch. I'm just starting the prep work on that right now to start getting things in order. Let's prep, let's get stuff ready, and then we'll continue on. Hey all, welcome back to the channel. Brendan here, aka Cliff Jumper, and yes indeed we are back on the Jetta project after a very long hiatus, or I should say we're on one of the Jetta projects because we also have this one sitting here waiting for attention. But right now we are doing the clutch in my daughter's 1.8 turbo Mk4 Jetta. It's a 5-speed manual and it's been a very, very long time since I've done a clutch. Let's do this. So yeah, the last time I did a clutch or a transmission out, I swore it would be the last time I ever touched one of these things because it's a lot involved and it's heavy. It's hard to manipulate, you know, transmissions are heavy. I do not have a lift. I do not have a transmission lift. We're gonna be finagling this. I will be calling in one of my friends to help me maneuver the thing into place once I get it. I'm gonna get everything out. Having it fall out of the car, not a big deal. We can make that happen. And then on the reassembly side, I'm gonna bring in one of my friends who's an expert in Mk4 1.8 turbos specifically, and he's gonna help me get this all back together and back on the road. In the meantime, let me show you what I've done. I think I may have covered this earlier, but I'm just gonna recap because it's been a while since we touched this. Taken out the battery, I've taken out all the air box and the stuff in this area. I've started to disconnect things in this area, but we're gonna come back and do all that kind of one shot. I am in the process of taking out the axle, or at least disconnecting the axles from each side of the transmission. There's a cup that receives them. They have these 12-point triple square bolts that hold them in place. It can be tricky to get out. It's easy to strip them. So here is a tip on this. Whenever you are dealing with these, before you start putting any sort of torque on them whatsoever, back up inside there is the axle where the axle bolts are. Before you try torquing these things to get them off, it's great practice to use a rubber mallet or a hammer. Hammer that 12-point socket in place first before you start torquing it, just to make sure you don't strip it, because if you strip that, it's going to be a very bad day. Now, one of the ways I have found to make this less painful in getting it out is there's kind of a place where it's the ideal spot to be able to get a socket in there, and you can see this is where I found it. So it's kind of the 10 o'clock position where it comes to one of these axles on a Mk4. This is on the driver's side. The 10 o'clock position gives you access to get in with an extension, and then what you want to do is take a screwdriver, stick it in your brake right there. That's going to hold this in place and give you something to torque against. Then you can use a breaker bar or your wrench and torque it. I've already loosened this one, so it'll come out pretty nicely at this point. But once you have done that bolt in particular, you can remove the triple square, remove this, and rotate to the next position, then do the same thing. Get this in place to hold that, and you can move on to the next bolt and go around, get all 6. So just a little tip and a trick how to get that out with a minimum of problem. On the other side, there is another index position that makes it easy, and it's the same sort of deal. Looking down through here, it's way back up in there. So if we were gonna approach it from this side, we're still gonna use a screwdriver right here. And then when we get down under here, there's a bit more access from actually under the car to get in here with just your regular socket wrench, so you can put torque directly on it, but still make sure you hammer in that socket so you don't strip those things. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this out, get the axles out. As part of this procedure, I'm gonna be removing the lower control arms because these are roached out, the bushings are toast. We're gonna replace this whole thing. We're gonna replace the ball joints as well. I'm thinking about even swapping out the coilovers for shocks and struts because I want a softer ride, an easier, more controllable ride for my teenage daughter driving this instead of this slam to the ground, super stiff suspension. I might do that as part of this process since stuff's gonna be swung out of the way anyway. Haven't decided, but I do have a set of H&R springs and Bilstein shocks that can go in here that would work really well. So all of that's gonna come out of the way, and that'll make it easier to start getting the transmission decoupled to do the clutch. Okay, that's it. All the bolts are out of this axle, so it is now loose from that. So when I swing this out of the way, after I decouple all this stuff, then the axle is free. Now I need to do the other side. Yeah, I want to try to unbolt as much stuff as possible in the engine bay to get prepared. A lot of stuff. There is a lot of stuff that does need to get disconnected in here to prepare for doing a clutch. A lot of things need to be out of the way just for the sake of if the engine drops a bit. I do have an engine support brace that will go across the top that will make sure that it doesn't fall too hard, because these are really old motor mounts and I probably need to replace those too, but I'm not going to right now. And whenever you're doing a big build or repair that involves taking off a lot of parts, I highly recommend using a couple of techniques to keep track of all the bolts and parts. Either or both. We use a baggie technique. So if I've got a bunch of parts that are all the same, I'll throw them in a Ziploc baggie and label it. And for the other stuff, I'll use the cardboard technique. I'll just punch it through a cardboard box and label what it is. That way I can come back to it as I need. Now this shifter bracket is now loose. We're actually going to be replacing the shifter cables and assembly. Actually, no, I take that back. I was thinking my other car. The other Jetta, we're replacing the shifter assembly. This one we're not. So all we need to do is secure it kind of out of the way a little bit when we replace this. But first we got to get the slave cylinder out of the way. We got to disconnect this support bracket. We need to disconnect some wiring that's going through here that is attached to the starter. There's a bunch of stuff we need to take off, so we'll continue on through here. Oh yeah. Got all that crud stuck in there. We're gonna clean that out. Yep. That is pretty gross. Undo these bolts so we can swing the spindle out of the way and we can disengage the lower control arm. I'm going to go ahead and undo the lower sway bar as well before we do any of these shenanigans. I'll do that on both sides, get it over there also. So those are loosened and free. Starting on some actual transmission stuff, so we got to get off the lower dog bone mount on that one. Let's see, where's my tool? Got a couple of 16-inch other way bolts. I'm going to mark them front and middle so I don't forget. It should be obvious, but yeah, I'm still going to mark them as I put them away. And then a couple of, I don't know, 13 millimeters back here, and that should free this dog bone, get it out of the way. And this thing is pretty roached out. It's completely collapsed, falling apart, so we're going to put in a polyurethane one. Should last a lot longer. It will have more engine vibration on the new one, but since this car is a little sporty, I'm not going to be too upset about that. I have not released the motor mount bolts up on top yet. They're still connected. I'm going to go ahead and release this bolt because it's a pain in the neck and you forget about it if you don't do it right off the bat, and they get the ones that are kind of all around, and then do the top ones, support this with a jack so it doesn't just fall. And yeah, we should be well on our way to getting this thing off. So that one first so I don't forget it. Up top, I'm gonna loosen the bolts along the block housing there. I'm still not undoing the motor mount bolts until last. I want to leave them supporting the transmission and make sure that I've got support on the motor up here as well before I let go of anything underneath. So we do have an engine support bar. Let's see how much torque it takes to release these. Quite a bit. All right. Just proceeding to break these bolts loose. Okay. Okay, this one's a starter bolt, goes all the way through. I am going to take that one out all the way. There's this lovely metal bracket. It's the one that the wiring bracket slides onto. We have to get that out of the way first before we undo this bolt. Happy, happy, joy, joy. Yep, 13. That's our winner. Cracked it loose. Now let's see if I can just spin it off. There we go. The entire purpose of this thing is to make sure that this wiring doesn't get overheated or melt from exposure to the starter. There aren't any shorts with the starter when there's a lot of current running, so fun. Just go around and make sure. I do have it supported from a jack underneath, so that's good. But I think it's ready to come down. I don't want this falling on my face while I remove it, so I'm going to go ahead and put one of the motor mount brackets back in just to hold it in place while I do that remaining starter bolt, and then take out this. We should be good to drop. The 13mm nut holding in the bracket. Plenty of room. I think I can zip that out. Okay, what do you know? I think we got it. I cleared that other axle that was fouling it up. I think I can make sure that the powering steering hose does not get caught on it. We're in fairly good shape to drop it down. Wonder if I lower the engine and if I can give it a little bit more of an angle down, if that would help. I'll try relieving some of the engine support and see if I can bring it down a little bit.
20 minutes later.
Well, yeah, that is a smoked clutch. Looky, looky, looky. That's fantastic. All right. So wrestled that transmission off and it was nasty dirty. I went ahead and pressure washed it. It's looking a lot more acceptable now. I do need to replace the pilot bearing, but everything's a lot cleaner. What we still need to do is remove the pressure plate because that's pretty gross. It needs to be replaced. It's done. That does require an impact 12.12 millimeter socket. I do have one, so we'll get that off and do a little bit more cleaning with some brake clean on the backside of the engine housing there on the block. And I think we're on our way. I am gonna need a second pair of hands to wrestle the transmission up into the car. But wait, there's more, because this is the gift that keeps on giving. What we discovered while doing repairs is the subframe here has a stripped out part where the lower control arm on the passenger side is supposed to thread in. The threads are completely stripped and there's no real way to get a nutsert in there and replace it. So we're gonna have to drop that frame and replace the subframe. So add that to the to-do list. So we're gonna undo the control arm that we put in on this side. It shouldn't be too bad, get that out. And then undo the power steering bolts and I believe the sway bar is probably bolted in up there as well. There's a bunch of stuff. So we've got to unbolt that and then put another one in. That's actually going to give us a little bit more access on the back side of the motor. So while we're in there, you know how that goes. While we're in there, I'm going to just take a peek at the turbo and see what shape it's in. I believe it is the original turbo with 241,000 miles. And I'm not going to have a better shot at access if I was going to replace it and just put a fresher one in. So this might be the time for it. We'll see. Yeah, anyway, let's get to it. Yeah, you can see the beauty of the dual mass flywheel here. This internal part is sprung so that it makes for a gentler transition when you engage and disengage the clutch. But as it wears out, it just, yeah, can cause issues. Looks like it got contaminated. It might be some sort of lubricant from the dual mass flywheel itself. I'm not really sure, but looking up in there, it looks like the rear main seal is fine. I don't see any leaks internally. There is evidence of leakage up around, well, it looks like it's from up high on the block. So there's been an oil leak up there, and it was dripping down onto the housing. Looks like it might have got into the clutch. Just looking at what we got here, looks like that is evidence of some liquid getting into it through this gasket. So yeah, good times. So we might use a little bit of sealant when we put this back together, because the gasket has gotten messed up while we've been switching stuff around. We want to try to keep our clutch nice and dry when we reinstall it. And yeah, it looks like the turbo is pretty nasty and oily. Looks like there's been all sorts of leaky stuff. This does have an aftermarket turbo inlet pipe. I think it's from ECS Tuning, but I'm not sure. So I'm gonna be inspecting all of this stuff and doing some cleaning before we do anything else. But then again, this entire K-frame has to come out and get replaced too. So we got a bit of work ahead of us left to do.
And on that terrible disappointment, it's time to say goodbye. We'll be back.